We back, ready to go. I'm here this morning to talk about how do we steward our land assets. And by way of background, how I got into this whole deal was if you go from South Sioux City to O'Neill, Nebraska on Highway 20, I got family on both sides of that road. and family farmland that's been slowly sold off, no surprise there. So, but my parents managed to escape the farm, went to Wayne State College, met each other. One was from Laurel and one was from Plainview.
I know those.
And my dad ended up at Drake, and we lived in Minburn. I have assumed by now it's a suburb of Des Moines. It wasn't back when I was growing up. Still out, no, I need to go out and visit. And then he went to the University of Nebraska, and I'm surprised the car I'm using doesn't have a bunch of Husker stickers on it. But they escaped and moved to Mankato, Minnesota, where my dad taught for like 40 years at Mankato State. And my mom was the international student advisor. But boy, did they put up obstacles to me becoming a farmer. They were happy to send me to the farm all summer. And my grandpa was an organic farmer. In other words, he had a lot of grandchildren, and they gave him machetes and told him to walk up and down the bean in the corn rows and chop the weeds out. So I fell in love with the dirt and the soil. But boy, every obstacle imaginable. And I ended up going into international relief and development. And up until this past December, I spent 18 years with Episcopal Relief and Development. And I retired to go into a whole new line of work. And that is just working with the church and religious communities about stewarding their land. And it's just like this penny dropped over and over again when I was overseas. Our church owns a lot of land. So one of the areas where I'm going to say ERD, because I can get away with it now that I'm not on staff. If you're on staff, you're always supposed to say Episcopal Relief and Development, because people are worried that, people might not understand. So don't tell Rob Radke this, okay, Bishop? But ERD partners with Anglican partners throughout the world, and one of the biggest parts of the work is in small-scale agriculture. Because the one asset that the church globally has is land. And you don't have to be much of a church historian to understand how we came into owning that land. Primarily working in countries that were colonized by the Brits and, the U.S. We own large parcels of land in places like the Philippines. And so, I really saw how they were able to leverage that. Everything from kitchen gardens to church gardens to, I remember visiting a farmer's co-op for the whole community that was on Episcopal church land in the middle of Burundi. Not a country you would expect. A large presence of Episcopalians. We're a very small religious group, but we own a lot of land. So I started looking at our land here in the United States very differently. We have large parcels of land. We're in real strategic places on main streets, right on the town square. But, so I really started grappling with it and thinking, we maintain all this land or we let it go fallow, and how can we be better stewards of it? And so I took a sabbatical from ERD, and I spent 3 months looking at church agriculture or missional agriculture. And one of the first places I visited on that sabbatical was Des Moines, largely because my sister lives there. And so I was just enthralled by St. Timothy's Church and what they are doing there. They do all the work basically, but the Presbyterians donate a lot of land. But everything is good. Everything is good. And these are just some scriptures that have driven me over the years. Guess I didn't run the spell check. These have really kept me going. And the other tradition of our church that has captivated me is rogation. We're seeing more and more parts of the church celebrate Rogation Tide. It's one of those mysterious feasts, lasts for 3 days before, I'm looking at a priest, it's before Ascension, right. But it's a strategic time in terms of growing and planting. And I just want to read this prayer as a way of starting. For favorable weather, temperate rains and fruitful seasons, and that there may be food and drink for all your creatures, we pray to you, O Lord. Amen. For your blessing upon the lands and the waters, and all who work upon them to bring forth food, and all things needful for your people, we pray to you, O Lord. Amen. For all who care for the earth, the water and the air, that the riches of your creation may abound from age to age, we pray to you, O Lord. Amen. Where should we think in terms of our land assets? The one that immediately will spring to mind are our local congregations. But there are also Episcopal schools, and particularly we have a lot of preschools, seminaries. Which seminary did you guys go to? Sewanee. I'll get to Sewanee a little later. That's a special one. Where did you go, Bishop? General. And we're seeing just about every seminary is growing flowers and food, and really, thinking about how they care for the land and for their space. Monasteries, camps and conference centers, parking lots, and I'll get to parking lots a little later. Members of the congregations, their backyards. Diocesan offices. I've got a really good one, slide a little later. Empty lots. We own some empty lots. I've come across a few dioceses. I know that you know where all your land is. But there are a few dioceses in the country. I've managed to find land that the bishop and even his staff weren't aware that they held title to because of old bequests. Or they just turned it over to a property manager and they get money every month, but they are not real sure where that money's coming from. It's always some land we own. But we have land. Cemeteries. Lots of cemeteries. How do we steward those in new and different ways, especially the ones where we're not burying anymore? Our church, particularly the Episcopal Church, owns a lot of land, And it's really hard for me to get away from that word owner. We own. We are all just stewards of everything in creation. One piece from our own Anglican tradition is the glebe. And that's a parcel of land that is set aside by the crown or the big landholders that probably sit in the House of Lords, but they set aside a big piece of property and all the benefit goes to the clergy. And now I love the third bullet point. Legend has it that the Dutch bought Manhattan Island from the Lenape, the Banahan, the Carnoustie, the Shinnecock, and the Munsee tribes for $24 worth of beads. Now, we all know that, and we've heard that before. Not real sure, but shouldn't let a good, story get in the way of the truth. But then, after the Brits took it, Queen Anne gave Trinity Church on Wall Street 215 acres of land, primarily in Lower Manhattan. And that real estate's worth $2 billion, and they've got a lot of prime real estate. Like I said, I was going to get to Suwannee. 13,000 acres on the Cumberland Plateau. If you haven't been there, you should go. And it was originally used as a summer retreat for Confederate generals. And I'm sure the rector in Spirit Lake can regale you with all sorts of wonderful stories about the domain. So the Romans, they have 177 million acres worldwide. These two religious groups, they kind of keep track of things and numbers really well. The LDS has 2 billion worth of land in the U.S. And I'm still trying to find stats about how much land we own in the Episcopal Church. But anecdotally, as I move around and I listen to people, we own a lot of land. I know you've talked about the ABCDs all the time. And asset-based community development. And this is one of the ways that Episcopal Relief and Development operates with all of our partners globally about seeing what are our assets. Instead of looking at the problem or, the deficit, looking at the assets. And then, in conversation with the community around us, we figure out what we want to be involved in terms of developing our communities. So there we go, Emmitsburg. And there's Trinity. I love Google Earth. I can go and look at where people are located and get just a little bit of a sense. Now, when I got here, I guess I cropped it a bit close. I'm not real sure how far it goes back there. Do you just go to where it's mowed, or do you go past it?
Where it's mowed. There's a tree line there where it's mowed.
Okay. But these are assets in terms of where you're located. A church on Main Street and a church with, a lot of land asset. That's a wonderful thing. And there's so many different things, but this is sort of the first thought people go to, the immediate. We'll plant a garden, and we'll donate it to the food bank, and we should do that, of course. And, but that's not the only options you have, and it's something that we will explore further this afternoon, and just really talk about a number of different ways that we can leverage these assets, not for the benefit of the congregation as much as the benefit of the whole community. And I'm excited about that. I'm always advocating for edible landscaping, just because, when I'm walking around, I'm kind of hungry usually. I like to be able to grab you know, a handful of berries on my way into church. And so, you know, doing edible landscape or intercropping vegetables and ornamentals. And I'm seeing this new movement. It's wonderful to see of more and more churches growing patches of flowers for their altars. You know, where we source our food and our flowers, you know, is a matter of stewardship in terms of the amount of fossil fuel it takes for that food to get cross-country or flowers. You have food options here that other parts of the country and the world don't have. But, you know, a lot of food that ends up at Costco or Walmart, you know, it takes a lot of petroleum to get it there, and we need to better consider that. You know, there are community gardens, and then, you know, this is a wonderful, anyone who goes to Minneapolis or St. Paul, this is House of Hope Presbyterian. It's across the street from the mayor's, the governor's mansion. This is where Hubert Humphrey was buried from, but it's this big, stately, well-manicured church, but they threw up a church garden right in the front yard on Summit Avenue and are still having problems with their neighbors about what they did. You know, this is a conversation in terms of how we steward, you know, about in terms of composting. You know, I think most of us have gotten away from just taking our grass clippings and, you know, whatever we're pruning off of our trees to the dump. You know, it does get composted, but sometimes it takes quite a bit to haul it away, for it to be processed, then for it to be shipped back to Walmart to sell to us. I think having a program of composting is something that is good. Yeah, Sunday school. I always say that, you know, Sunday school, the best classroom is a garden. And you know, Melissa and I were talking on the way down, and she was sharing, you know, that, you know, why not just use a garden and growing food for year round. You know, put up a greenhouse, put in hydroponics indoors, and you know, if my child, who's, you know, he claims he's agnostic, but you know, he's 25, so whatever. Is what I tell him. But you know, he hated Sunday school with a passion. And then when they switched to godly play, he hated it even more. And you know, finally, by the time he got into junior high, we just let him stay at home. And he loves to work in the garden. And you know, when I look back, I wish I would have just told him when we rolled up to church, why don't you just go work in the church garden? You can skip Sunday school. Because he has, you know, that seed surely has been planted inside the Sunday school room, but I also think the seeds that he's planted in the backyard have had a profound impact on his life. That's what, when he tells me he's an agnostic, I say whatever. You know, that seed's gonna grow and sprout, and it's gonna pop out and bloom. So I think, you know, formation, there's more and more curriculum options out there in terms of formation. One that I helped develop when I was at Episcopal Relief and Development is called the Abundant Life Garden Project. And it basically has 5 different units, one on soil, one on water, you know, solar, and you know, different subjects. And you can download it online at episcopalrelief.org. But you know, I know Fortress has been putting out some things. So really consider that. And you know, when there's only one or two kids in your Sunday school, well, you know, an adult can go outside with them and just dig in the dirt. This is a living labyrinth. It is next door to the diocesan office in Los Angeles in Echo Park. And you know, this was early after they planted it. I have seen it when it's fully, but again, it's vegetables and it's flowers that have grown into that labyrinth, because it seems like every church that has land, you know, one of the really first things they think about doing is putting in the labyrinth, which is a fantastic idea. I mean, I came across a place that they don't have a stitch of grass, none whatsoever. The cathedral in Phoenix. They may have a few little strips, but they put in this labyrinth in a very conspicuous place. And every day people from the community, from the business towers, you will see them walking. And you know, they still, but they kind of still want to put their hands in the dirt. They still wanted some sort of agrarian ministry that they could hold on to. And so they started getting to know the people at the local elementary school. More and more of our schools, public schools, have gardens, but you know, they have a real big problem in the summer in particular, because there aren't any kids or teachers around to take care of the gardens. And so Trinity Cathedral has a team that's helping them during those gap periods. But also many of them are master gardeners as well. And they, you know, the school has put them to work in terms of teaching the kids about growing food. How many master gardeners here? Any master gardeners? Okay. I bet there's master gardeners back in your congregations. Extension services all over the country offer these classes. I mean, Iowa State University, you know, operates one of the best state extension services. You know, soup to nuts. I mean, it's not just, you know, large farms that they service, but you know, and I have learned with extensions that all you have to do is ask for help, and they're only too happy to help. You know, some, you know, other churches, you know, have, you know, don't have a lot of space, so I've seen some very innovative vertical gardens. And this is at the Anglican Center in Gambela, Ethiopia. And I just really like it. There's a school, Imago Dei School in Tucson, Arizona. They don't have a stitch of grass like Phoenix. And so they've transformed their courtyard into a garden, and they have taken, you know, horse troughs and encircled the whole patio, and they've stacked them up. But on one end, they have a wrought iron fence, and they have taken old pairs of blue jeans, cut the legs off, sewn up the bottoms, and put really light, airy soil in it, and they're growing tomatoes. And so they've got an irrigation system on the top that drips water into the top pair of jeans, and then the water goes down through into the next layer of jeans all the way down. And the food lunch program, and many of the kids at the school live in, it's a school for disadvantaged kids in the community, and so a lot of them live in food deserts. So there's not a lot of fresh produce rolling around. But sometimes, you know, our imagination can let us go wild. There has been a new farm that has started in California at the Camp and Conference Center, Bishop's Ranch, and they're planting wheat. And they harvest it, they mill it, and they they operated as a CSA. CSA is Community Supported Agriculture. And so you buy a share of the crop, the anticipated crop. And throughout the summer, you will get a box of fresh food. You don't really know what's going to be in the box. Many of you are very familiar with it, but you know, this wheat CSA, this flour CSA, is for Eucharistic bread. And so there are churches in California and now in Michigan where they've started, they franchised Honore Farm and Mill. St. Honore is the patron saint, I think, of bread bakers. You know, they're milling wheat, and so people can make their Eucharistic bread out of the sweet from this farm. And definitely the hands that bring it from the field and mill it have blessed it already before the priest gets to it. Roof gardens. When I was driving up there, I thought that would be a great church for a roof garden. I'm kidding. No chance, folks. I guess you could figure out some sort of vertical garden. But you recognize the raised beds, don't you? Those little blue kids' wading pools. This is at a Baptist church in Hell's Kitchen in New York. And kids from the neighborhood grow food, and then they have a cooking program that they run so this is sort of an after school, you know, summer activity that kids can go to, but they grow the food, they harvest it, and then, you know, there are, you know, who knows? My guess is, given their location, they have professional chefs that come in and teach them how to cook it. And here's one of my favorite ones. This is Fullerton, California. This would be very appropriate for Okoboji. Those are little boats, dinghies, that they've built as raised beds. And so the Suffragan Bishop even has a boat, the SS Bruce. But it's St. Andrew's Church. You get it? Church orchards, fruit trees. I'm really excited, and I wish it would take hold in the United States. And I guess I'm going to have to do it myself. But I think 3 or 4 dioceses in Greater London, Chelmsford, London, of course, Southwark, maybe Rochester, they have teamed up with the Lord Mayor's office, who's Muslim. And it was the mayor's idea to get churches to plant fruit trees to provide more shade cover throughout the city, you know, as a way of bringing, you know, the average temperature down. You know, these concrete sort of jungle type metropolitan areas, you know, it is a real issue. And they're also at the same time as, you know, these trees going into churchyards, there are also more and more beehives going up at churches. Actually, the cathedral in Manchester has a canon apiarist on their, I don't know if the person's on their staff, but I aspire to that title.
Brian, I have a question about bees. I've heard a number of churches be concerned about bees, that their members might get stung. Can you speak into
Well, you know, there's bees out there right now. So there's bees around right now. I bet if we went and looked at the window, we'd find a bee.
So I mean, I get it's unfounded. Is there an argument that one could use to convince churches that it's actually
That the people who are allergic to bees know they're allergic, and they carry EpiPen if it's a severe allergy. But you know, the only people who really get stung are the idiots like me who don't wear their protective clothing when they're digging in the hives. You have to be aggressive towards bees for them to want to sting you. Otherwise, they basically leave you alone. And what, you know, in terms of urban beekeeping, there's a strain of bees that a lot of keepers use, and they're Italian. These are really laid back. They are not very aggressive at all. Now, you know, and I'm not pulling your leg, but the more aggressive bee that you probably shouldn't have in an urban environment are Russian bees. Seriously. And then this other picture is St. Jude's in Cupertino, California. So, you know, our watches and our computers are all set to Cupertino, California.
Sure.
So they are in the shadow of Apple. And you know, where Apple is located used to be all orchard everywhere. And St. Jude's, you know, has hung on to their orchard. And, you know, the biggest frustration they have is, you know, some people will pull up because they just basically say, take as much as you need. But then there's some people who really need a lot. And they see people carting away bushels of, a lot of it's apricots in this orchard. But you know, pollination is a huge thing that we have to be mindful of. You know, there more and more churches are doing this in communities where there are fruit trees. You know, because some people just can't. You know, they go to waste. They fall on the ground. And there are these urban fruit rescue organizations that are around. I always keep this slide in just as an inspiration because you know, we can not only think about how we steward our land, but how do we deploy some of our human resource asset in a way that's congruent with what we're called to do right here. And you know, I don't know if these, I didn't ask them, this was in Southern California, this group, but you know, it could very well have fruit trees on the church property, and you know, once they get done with their own, they go out and help the community. So I've talked a bit about bees and beehives and beekeepers, and you know, I'm gonna, I had a bit of a snafu with my computer, and so I still have about a dozen slides left, so I think this afternoon we'll finish them off, but I really go through a lot of just other ideas, and I love gatherings like this because I always come away with even more ideas. So I mean, one of the things that just went off on my head, especially as you were getting close to the Iowa border coming down from Windham, there are so many wind turbines.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. And so when I got back to Melissa did a little Googling in the car to see if there are any churches that have wind turbines. And lo and behold, yes, there are. And so I've got a really cool slide of one of those churches. But you know, I think we need to start thinking about, you know, enterprise as a part of our ministry. So often we think if we're going to do sort of these money-making things for our general fund, that's not as good as just giving it all away. And I think that we'll have a really wonderful discussion about that this afternoon, because you know, one of the other great assets that churches have along with their land and their buildings are their kitchens. We got some this is a fantastic kitchen. And you know, it's probably used all the time, but you know, there might be periods when it's not being used. You know, is there a young entrepreneur in the community that wants to start up a catering business but just doesn't have the money to rent a place to go? You could rent, they could rent from you. Maybe you don't charge, you know, market rate, but below market rate. But you know, in that, you know, so there are a lot of different ways we can think differently about our ministries in terms of you know, our own creativity. I mean, there are churches that there's a church in Lynchburg, Virginia, St. John's, that they've got a big church garden. The church folks grow the food, so it's not a community garden per se. And then on Sundays during sort of harvest time, that starts early because they've got it staged. People from the congregation bring food from their backyard gardens to church on Sunday. And then the food from the church gets added, and they have a farmer's market for the members. And and people from the community come. They skip church, but they're quite happy to come and buy fresh produce, and they know this is a good place. And that money half of it goes to the local food bank, because the one thing food banks need more than food is money, because their buying power is so much greater than us donating them a can of food. And then the other half went to Episcopal Relief and Development for food security programs globally. And so sometimes we can make money off our neighbors, so our mission is extended. The other thing that I'm just going to touch on, because I want to touch on it with the whole group, is there's more and more religious congregations, groups are aging out, and they just don't have the wherewithal to maintain their property. And sometimes they own property really close to prime real estate or adjacent to it, and it's like the developers are circling overhead and want to buy them out. And many of them are starting to put their land into trust for young and disadvantaged farmers who have tenancy issues. Not everyone these days, fewer and fewer young farmers are inheriting farms. There are a lot of young people who grow up in the city and they decide they want to farm. But they don't have, they're not going to get a loan to buy. They don't have the working capital to buy, so they rent. And they have tenancy issues. And they get tossed off the land because, the owners sold it to a developer. So we're starting to see more and more of churches putting their land, working with a land trust to put it into trust, guaranteeing that it will be farmed in perpetuity. There's a wonderful example of a Roman Catholic women's order in Western Massachusetts that has done just that. And they've started to build relationships with these farmers who have, are on that land for the long haul. And they're extending those religious sisters' mission. I just want to plant that little seed to all of you as you go away, because also we have members of our churches who have land, and their kids don't want to farm. There are different ways of putting it in trust so that there's income coming to the family. But the land stays, designated as farmland. And it can, you can specify what kind of farming is done on that land even, in terms of organic or inorganic. It's a cause that I'm really interested in these days. So, is it lunchtime, or do we have time just to talk a little bit?
We've got lunch here. We could, it's not going to be 40 minutes for lunch is ample, don't you think?
Yeah.
So I think we can talk for a few minutes. When you're talking about entrepreneurs and that sort of thing, there are some places that are actually developing their kitchens to become commercial kitchens and doing that. But in particular, and it relates to this congregation, also the congregation of St. Albans, that, and Terry has just disappeared. you know, they've got a connection with our companion diocese in Swaziland. And Bishop Alina in particular has really, because she's a city planner, was the city planner for Manzini, she's brought that skill and passion into her episcopacy and really works hard at developing what she calls the capacity of the diocese. And by capacity, she means the ability to make money, to be able to support the other ministries of the church. And so even her last diocesan newsletter that's just come along has a couple of projects like that featured. One is a real estate piece where they've got, you know, developing student housing for, with Trinity Wall Street, student housing for, on their farmland. They've got a large farmland out in the Lesotho Mission, and that's right opposite the Department of Agriculture for the University of Swaziland. So they've developed the farm. They had some people come in to develop the farm, which was a hit and miss kind of project. But they've also now developing housing for the students, the agricultural students that are coming. And so they've got, she has pictures of that. And then with the help of UTO and Iowa, they started a piggery.
Wow.
And we have a whole piggery thing going on, we call it a piggery. A piggery of roofing. And, you know, and it's got, so they've got one boar and 10 sows and 40 little ones coming along. I mean, it's quite something. And then fruit trees was the other one that they are developing. And so she's really keen on trying to call the entrepreneurs in the diocese out to put some of their talents for money making, basically, through these enterprises to the benefit of the church. And so that's one of those things that we take when we engage with them as companions. That's one of the things we bring home. Because every time I close a church, it turns into a condominium, or as it happened in Spencer, it turned into a restaurant. I think, why didn't we do that ourselves? You know, rather than give up the church property, those
I'm getting goosebumps now.
those developers that are sort of circling, why can't we be one of those developers? And so we do that. I mean, New York does
Oh,
it.
look, the Amana colony.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly. I mean, there's lots of possibilities. But, so anyway, I think that's what,
That's going to be
Case
fun
in
for
mind.
us to discuss this afternoon.
yeah.
One of the seeds I see in this congregation is sort of on the opposite end of the year. On November 3rd, this congregation has St. Hubertus Day, which is, St. Hubertus is the patron saint of hunting. It's a hunter's mass. And so, usually it's a bunch of guys, but then we have everybody comes in the evening and they bring the game they've shot in pheasant season, so pheasants. They bring their guns and they bring their dogs, and so we have a Eucharist celebrate. It's a big stewardship
I love
thing.
that.
And then we go bless.
Maybe I can get my son-in-law to
everything. We
church.
bless the hunters, we bless the guns, we bless the pheasants. So
You know, there's a priest in, I think Corpus Christi, who started an organization, a guild, a hunters guild.
There is a Hunters Guild here.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the, you know, the All Saints Mission in Minneapolis is involved in wild ricing in northern Minnesota, and then selling it. You know, there's so many. There's a church in Aberdeen, Washington, that each year has a complete sort of community-wide feast with food, all local food, game. You know, and there's a lot of cranberry bogs. There's clams and mussels, and other, you know, salmon. There's a lot of salmon in that part of the world. But, you know, again, you're really getting people to think about local food. But also, I mean, my son-in-law takes his one deer a year, and it feeds him and my daughter throughout the winter. And so they're, their 10-month-old is gonna develop a taste for venison. And if my son-in-law has his way, elk as well, cause he's trying to take an elk with a bow.
Wow.
We just get asked for permission.
Yeah.
We got asked.
Oh, in
for
terms of
permission
roadkill?
For, to have the neighbors have bows and arrows up in the trees next door to Mill's house, where the Dowson office is, to get rid of some of the deer. And I said, I'm not gonna be the bishop that kills Bambi.
They're just large four-legged rodents.
We need help. We'll do it.
Oh, deers are a pain.
We'll make you deacon for that purpose.
What did you say about,
Color
what
my
did
decoy.
you say about the urban fruit rescue? What was that? Did you say?
You know, it's people with fruit trees on their property. And, you know, the fruit's just falling on the ground. And in Seattle, it's a hazard because it'll get slippery. And they will fine you in Seattle if you don't harvest your fruit and it's falling on the sidewalk. And so, you know, groups of people will come, and before it falls off the tree, you know, they will harvest it and it will go into the food bank system. But, you know, it could even, you know, you could even make apple butter and sell it for outrageous rates.
I'm trying to remember the name of the film, but there was an Episcopal church that was about to die, and there was also a group of
Yeah,
Karen?
Yeah.
Karen?
it's called All Saints is the movie. It's the guy from Sex and the City
But,
and Northern Exposure.
I mean, you know, that was a wonderful kind of combination of, you know, these two talks where, I mean, it was a fabulous outreach and way to include,
Well, let me
people
tell
in
you-
church, people who had expertise in an area.
Let me tell you a little story about that.
Yeah.
It's in Smyrna, Tennessee. You can't get to Swanee without at least passing close by from the Nashville airport. So I spent some time there during my sabbatical about 5 years ago. And so, you know, the diocese has bought about 20 acres worth of land with visions of megachurch dancing in their head. and it never happened. And so it was just this church struggling with all this fallow land. And this group of Karen refugees went, because they're Anglican, from the church in Myanmar, another British colony, you know, they went to the Anglican church. Well, they weren't really well received. And then finally they figured out that the Episcopal Church was the Anglican church in the United States, so they found All Saints and transformed the place. And you know, I have found refugees and immigrants to be fantastic seed smugglers. You know, they bring their seeds with them. Or when a family member goes home, they bring seeds back because the farm, they've got a couple of tractors. People keep donating the big equipment that they need for 20 acres. But they've got like those, you know, 6-foot beans that you don't see very often here in the United States. And they actually make hot sauce that they sell. So they've got an enterprise. I don't know if that made it into the movie. I haven't seen the movie yet. But I wrote a book with a lot of little stories about church agriculture, and this one hit the cutting room floor, and I, you know, kicked myself over and over that I didn't get it in the book. But it's a wonderful place.
So I am really excited that this is film that we can look at it again if we want to, and those that aren't here will be able to look. But I'm a little frustrated because I want to go to both sessions this afternoon. So, what are we gonna do?
We have to choose.
Yeah.
And watch the video of the other one.
I mean, I don't know if any, the reason we said no videoing in the, we would ask
Oh,
no
okay.
videoing in the afternoon was because that was the presenter's request. And so I don't know if that would be the question, so then we can video, we can only video suppose with Episcopal
Hey.
Fellowship, I mean, they've church fellowship, in fact, I mean, Foundation, you've got yourselves pretty well.
I have,
It's all out
I
there,
have
isn't it?
nothing to not share with you all, everything that I have.
So we can continue to video yours this afternoon.
And it's
and then
very
you can go together.
conversational, so just so you know, so you can choose, and I wanna give advice. The second half will be very, very contextual, it'll be a lot more conversational, and me offering advice and experience and what I've seen across the country in terms of intergenerational ministry with children, youth, and families. And so it's really more conversational, and thought-provoking, if you will. But I'm happy for that to be videotaped.
I just want to ask about the Wild Church Network. And we have some connections with that in Dubuque. St. John's in Dubuque has a devotee of the Wild Church Network. And their subtitle is Reconnecting People with an Untamed God in Our Wild Homes. And it's a children's program as well, so that they actually, this particular family, invite neighborhood children to come out to their back garden. They've got a little valley kind of back garden, and in the wild they teach Sunday school. That's where they actually do Sunday school, including Lenten Stations of the Cross. And we said, well, you know, is that just for half the year? And no. The kids are in their sort of Eskimo outfits, and they do it in the middle of winter as well as everything else.
Wow.
And so, do you know much about that?
Not
Have you come
enough.
across it?
I've just touched on it briefly,
Yeah.
but I want to bone up before the next time I do something like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. All right.
And I forgot to mention too, I have my closing slide, the contact us part. I am with ECF now, and so you can find me on episcopalfoundation.org, and you can email me, you can call me if you've got any questions, and I'm also on the Book of Faces and Twitter, and I'm happy to be your friend.
I'm on the Twitter machine too. So I brought my book in case anyone wants to buy it. Now, it's become so popular that church publishing has raised the price. But I will sell it to you for a special rate. Only available in Spirit Lake of $15. But you know, this is a book that will never end. It's a book that tells the story through an Episcopal window. But all of these stories are about Episcopal churches, monasteries, seminary schools, and how they not just work amongst themselves, but how they partner with the wider community. And one of those very special places that is in the book is St. Timothy's, West Des Moines, because they partner with Bloom Everyone.
That's right.
You know, what's the name of the guy? The postman?
Marshall.
Mark Marshall. If he's out there working and you're there, he's just a wonderful person to talk with, and he'll talk about how he begs, borrows, and steals, and you know, brings in tons of food.
They
Last year.
They took their project and methodology to Anzar in South Sudan. They created a whole pineapple business there.
We have a lot to exchange and learn throughout the communion, and I think this story of what, you know, and I know your relationship with Swaziland has been like 30 or 40 years, and it's known throughout the wider church, but you know, that piggery story really needs to be told. The rector at Trinity was saying that sometimes Benjamin, the staff officer who works with Swaziland, doesn't tell the story loud enough. He hides his light under a bushel. So there's these great things going on.
As self-appointed process observer, may I invite us to
Lunch?
lunch
Yeah.
and get right to the